The United States is at it again. It has accused Iran of conducting a ballistic missile test that is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Iran has not confirmed conducting the test. Furthermore, it has said that its missiles and tests are not in violation of the JCPOA. In this edition of the debate, we'll discuss why the U.S. is again after Iran's missiles, which are used for defensive purposes.
Reminder of why we must.
American and Israeli officials have claimed that Iran recently carried out a ballistic missile test in defiance of the UN Resolution 2231. The resolution endorsed a landmark nuclear deal known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action between Iran and the P5+1 group of countries, signed on July 14, 2015. Iran has not confirmed conducting any recent missile test. However, the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif says his country's missile program has nothing to do with the deal.
The issue of missile testing is not part of Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and has no connection with the JCPOA.
Speaking at a joint press conference with visiting French counterpart Jean-Marc Ayrault, Zarif also hinted that the new U.S. administration may be seeking to use the alleged missile test as a pretext to unsettle the nuclear accord.
We hope that Iran's defense programs, which definitely are not subject to the UN Security Council's Resolution 2231 and not related to the JCPOA, will not turn into a pretext for political games aimed at creating new tensions by the new US administration.
Under the resolution adopted in July 2015, Iran is called upon not to undertake any activity related to missiles designed to deliver nuclear weapons. Iran says its missiles are not designed for such capability.
We have announced that none of our ballistic missiles are designed to carry nuclear warheads. We will never use our weapons against other countries except in our defense.
Tehran says its missile program is an integral part of its defense doctrine, which is not negotiable and is based on deterrence. Experts say those who are seeking to put the pressure on Iran over its missiles have ulterior motives.
I think the desire here is to not only portray Iran as a belligerent power, but to try to somehow infer that Iran doesn't have the sovereign right to defend its border. And of course, having a functional military and being able to defend your borders and actually act a deterrent against potential threatening foreign powers.
The International Atomic Energy Agency has issued several reports confirming Iran's full compliance with its obligations under the Multilateral Nuclear Accord. Iran has repeatedly complained that the United States is failing to live up to its commitments under the deal, which the US president has called a bad one. The stances of the new occupant of the White House has raised concerns that he might be using the issue of Iran's missile tests as an excuse to undermine the hard-earned JCPOA, which Donald Trump called a disaster and suggested his administration would abandon it.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, Richard Becker from the Answer Coalition, joins us from San Francisco. I'd like to welcome you, Richard Becker, and let me first get from you a reaction on this news of the U.S. accusation that Iran has conducted a missile test capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, in which Iran's foreign minister, as recent as hours ago earlier in the day, has said that Iran has not done so.
Well, I think that the agreement, the resolution by the United Nations was not a binding resolution on Iran, and that it had nothing to do with, as was said in the lead-in, to the JCPOA. What the United States government, and it hasn't really mattered whether it was the Obama administration or Trump or if Hillary Clinton had been elected, for a very long time has wanted to weaken Iran, to keep Iran in a state that it cannot defend itself against the United States, which has vast military forces deployed in the Gulf region. In that entire region, it really has Iran surrounded by U.S. military power. But I think that the Iranian government has been determined to develop, and as was said in the statement, a defensive capacity. Iran has not attacked other countries. We have no record of that in modern times, of Iran attacking any other countries, and its right to have defensive weaponry is beyond question in terms of international law. So I think that, again, we're seeing an attempt to create a certain atmosphere that would facilitate going forward with trying to undermine the JCPOA. And of course, if the JCPOA were to be undermined, then the direction that that would lead toward would be war.
Well, if you talk about the JCPOA, we do have to mention, obviously, the fact that Iran has complied with it, Richard Becker, and that comes from the IAEA chief and, of course, the IAEA being an arm of the UN, that it has complied with the terms. But what is interesting is you have that compliance, and then you have the fact that you have Israel calling for an emergency meeting for an action that Iran has said it did not do at their request. It doesn't quite make sense when you have the IAEA confirming that Iran has complied with the JCPOA. And of course, the fact that these are missiles meant to reinforce Iran's defense capabilities.
Well, Israel wants to change the subject, for one thing. The Israeli government wants to change the subject away from their illegal settlement policy, their annexationist settlement policy, and clearly it is annexationist. We saw that in December, Israel really was condemned by the international community in a much broader sense than the way that U.S. leaders use the term international community, where when the vote at the UN Security Council on the settlements took place and the United States abstained, and so therefore the vote was 14-0 to 1, the whole United Nations, the whole chamber erupted in applause. And you can see that Israel is very, very isolated. Its only real supporter in the world anymore is the United States government. And so they want to change the subject back to one of Iran. And it's the greatest kind of hypocrisy you can imagine that, you know, here's Israel, which illegally violates all international agreements, all international law regarding its domestic policies, its policies toward the Palestinians, but also has 200 or more nuclear warheads itself. Israel's policy has been to weaken all of the countries around it. And this is, of course, something that they've done as a junior partner to the United States, the weakening of the surrounding countries, the subordination of the countries of the Middle East. And the one country that they have not really been able to achieve this with, they have not been able to move forward with either to subordinate them or to weaken them, is Iran. The others are, you can see Syria has, has been decimated. Iraq has been torn apart. We've seen what's happened to the Palestinians, and yet the countries that are subordinate to the U.S., such as Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the Emirates, they're fine as far as Israel and the United States go. But there is a very determined element inside the U.S. Political establishment, as well as in the Israeli government, that wants to take on Iran and really wants to find a way to decimate Iran as well.
Let's see what Israel has said regarding this. And I'm looking at a quote here by Benjamin Netanyahu. Not a quote, but his action. He has said that he is going to push Donald Trump into renewing sanctions against Iran during his upcoming visit to Washington. And of course, we have seen how Donald Trump has, during his campaign trail, obviously he pledged allegiance somewhat to Israel, but obviously supports Israel. Do you see this being laying the groundwork for sanctions to come to Iran in terms of how the news is reported, the UN convening is at Israel's request, and of course the relationship that seems to be a warm one between Donald Trump and Israel and Bibi Netanyahu?
Well, there still are, of course, sanctions, some sanctions by the United States against Iran. I would be very, very surprised if the UN Security Council responded to Israel's request by imposing new sanctions. I don't think that's going to happen. The old sanctions regime, which really did a great deal of damage to Iran, has ended as a result of the JCPOA, of course. And many countries have important interest, economic interest and political interest in having good relations with the Iranian government. So I think it would be extremely surprising if the UN were to take such action. As far as the United States goes, that's a different story, and it is very possible, and probably what Netanyahu is hoping for is that not so much that the UN will take some action, but that the Trump administration will. And the big problem, a very big problem for Iran, if the U.S. imposes more sanctions, is that there's already a fear internationally that if you enter into, among corporations and banks and so forth, they enter into deeper economic relations with Iran, that then they will suffer very heavy penalties, fines, and so forth if the United States chooses to move in a more hostile direction.
Well, let me introduce Peter Sinnott from New York. He's an independent scholar to get now his views on what has occurred. Peter Sinnott, so we're looking at this piece of news that the U.S. has accused Iran of conducting a missile test that's capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Iran's foreign minister has said, no, we have not, and further and above that, it is within Iran's right, because these are missiles that are used for Iran's defense capabilities. Do you believe the news that the U.S. has given out on this?
I do believe the news. I think more important, we need to look at what Donald Trump said when he decided to run for the presidency. And he made it very clear that the reason he decided to run for the presidency last summer was related to the nuclear deal between the Obama administration and Iran. And the fact that you have Mike Pompeo now as head of the CIA, and he had spent a lot of time researching the financial aspects and the payments made to Iran, and he charged them as being a ransom for hostages. All of this says that the situation is not going to be good in relations between Iran and the United States unless Iran is willing to make a move that the Trump administration would see as being friendly. Obviously, the United States is about to deal with ISIL. I would take it seriously that President Trump will take the war to ISIL very soon, and he will not telegraph beforehand that he's going to do what he's going to do. So I think if Iran wants to have good relations with the United States, the key aspect is going to be the nuclear agency, the International Nuclear Agency. And this agency, the problem with the deal as the Trump administration has put forward when they were running for the presidency, is the problem of verification. And if Iran were willing to signal that they would be willing to have unscheduled inspections and let the international agency do a real conducting of the scene and seeing what they have, that would probably be the basis for better relations. As it stands now, I don't think they will be good.
Well, okay, so we're back to that. We're back to the JCPOA, Peter Sinnott, from the sounds of it, and the fact that you are questioning the viability of this. Richard Becker, you have Peter Sinnott holding that view, and I'm wondering if Peter Sinnott has read all the different verification that has occurred by the IAEA. However, let's look at the way that Trump is supposedly going to deal with Iran on this case. Why is it that the way that Iran is covered and the U.S. when it comes to the JCPOA is somewhat skewed, like it's a bilateral deal? It's not a bilateral deal. You have 5 other countries, and the EU is fully behind Iran, as exposed by or revealed by France in terms of their visit. You have Jean-Marc Ayrault, who was in Iran today, and he says he fully backs Iran on this deal. So why is it that the U.S. can feel like it can dictate the terms? Richard Becker?
Well, I think...
Go ahead. I think we have problems with Richard Becker. Peter Sinnott, go ahead.
Well, what I see quite clearly is the Trump administration the Trump presidency is a presidency that's going to be willing to go it alone on a lot of policy issues. And this is both the danger and the opportunity for Iran. Obviously, I don't speak from authority, but I can say that it's quite clear from the people that are in the administration and the way the first 10 days have gone, that he intends to focus on what he did when he began his campaign. And I think his Iran policy is rather clear. I think overall you're going to see the United States get very involved in the short period, but I think they're going to stay back for the longer period, because I think the Trump presidency is going to focus on building the domestic economy. And a lot of foreign aid is going to dry up. And a lot of people don't see this coming. But the people that are working for Trump have been signaling this for several months. So we're going to have a tremendous change. And if Iran wants to have good relations with the U.S., they're going to have to deal with the U.S. in a more bilateral way and in a more personal way. It's up to them. But that is my view, is how I see the Trump presidency and the situation in Iran, Iraq, and ISIL.
Okay, we have Richard Becker. Richard Becker, I'm not too sure if you heard Peter Sinnott's statements there. Do you have a reaction to it?
Well, I think that what motivates the United States government, and has motivated administration after administration after administration, has been the desire to dominate this entire region. And in order to dominate the entire region, they have to, the way they see it is that they have to weaken or decimate countries in the region, particularly the larger countries, the ones that want to go on an independent course. And of course, this goes all the way back. I mean, we're talking about more than 60 years of U.S. policy, from the coup back in 1953 to the policies that the United States has pursued vis-a-vis Iran over the years. Now, Iran says that the Iranian government, I think this is important to note, says that its weaponry is for defensive purposes. And there is no evidence that they have been used for offensive purposes. The same cannot be said about the United States. The United States will not even forego a first strike nuclear policy. It says it retains the right to do that. That's the policy of the United States. The United States has its bases all over the world. The United States has its bases surrounding Iran and its ships, including nuclear-armed submarines and other nuclear-armed weaponry, very, very close to Iran. You know, this isn't like Iran doesn't have bases in Mexico and Canada or anything like that. It doesn't have any bases, as far as I know, outside of the immediate region. So the policies that are pursued by the United States, whether the president was named Trump or Obama or Clinton or Bush or all the way back to Eisenhower, have been policies aimed at this objective, and the objective is domination.
Well, there's another bill that is a bill that was not shelved, but it was not paid attention to, Peter Sinnott, which gives the U.S. President, authorization to, without the approval of Congress, to go to war with Iran, and it has now been floated around again. Do you think that that's an indication of the type of approach that perhaps the U.S. is going to have under Trump when it comes to Iran?
I don't think so. I think the U.S. will go to war against ISIL, and very soon. And it will not be what you call a hesitation war or a slow motion war like under Obama. It will be directed very clearly against ISIL. And I really believe that after that you'll see a rather large fall-off in engagement with the region. If you look at the region now and you ask yourself, who is the United States ally in that region? The answer is clearly only the Kurds. So they don't have a state. But I really believe the U.S. is going to focus only on ISIL, and I think on Iran. Iran has the chance to deal with the United States now before the attacks on ISIL are really concentrated. And I think they have to, they'll be given a chance. But I really think in many ways the Trump presidency is an isolationist presidency, despite the fact that they will engage, I believe, very quickly and soon against ISIL. So I think for the United States to sort of have engaged with the region, it's going to, frankly, going to take a few things from Tehran in order to be accorded the respect. I hate to say this. Quite frankly, it is the celebration of the Iranian hostage-taking in '79 on a yearly basis. It's the fact that Mike Pompeo is now the current Central Intelligence Agency director. As a congressman, was able to show to the American people what many believe to be proof that it was a ransom for Americans as part of the deal with the Iran nuclear deal in July. So I believe these things together are what has brought us to the situation we have with the Trump presidency and Iran. The people around him do view Iran as a threat, and if Iran were to make some direct contact, it might be better for them. But right now, it's quite clear the clouds of war are gathering over ISIL.
Okay. Renegotiation has been something, Richard Becker, that Donald Trump has said about Iran's nuclear deal at a minimum. Do you think that the renegotiation that Iran has rejected, along with the EU, is going to put the U.S. at odds not just with Iran, but also with Europe? And given what we are seeing in these few days of the way that Europe has dealt with Trump's immigration executive order on immigrants on these 7 countries especially, that there's going to be a standoff between the U.S. and Europe also?
Well, I think that there are many, many contradictions between them. But one thing I have to say is that the idea that Iran, the U.S. giving back to Iran money that it had stolen from Iran, that is, assets that had been frozen by the United States, and you know, the fact that some of that money went back to Iran, to call it a ransom is like saying if somebody steals something from you and you get it back from them, that they've given you a gift. It's a ridiculous notion. And the United States, I think that the Trump government is a very, very dangerous government. I think that the America First rhetoric that he's putting forward, which is reminiscent of that movement that was really a pro-Nazi movement back in the late 1930s and early 1940s before World War II the U.S. entered World War II. That's for domestic consumption mainly. That's really part of this appeal of Trump, the chauvinist appeal, the xenophobic appeal, the anti-Muslim appeal. But in reality, the United States is still the most far-flung empire that's ever existed. No country in history has ever had the kind of military deployment all around the world that the United States has today. And Trump is going to have to defend the interest of empire. He may pull back in some areas and push forward in others. But the idea that somehow the United States is going to become isolationist under Trump, I think is ridiculous.
Very well, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you very much. Answer Coalition, Richard Becker there from San Francisco, and independent scholar Peter Sinnott spoke to us from New York. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From me, Kavitaway, and the entire team in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.